they continue to hysterically
A mobilization against AIDS and everybody who thinks that AIDS should be eliminated forever. And our MC today is Paul Boneberg, coordinator of Mobilization Against AIDS. Paul.
Well, it's wonderful to see such a good turnout here. This is exceptional. I want people to know if we're going to stop walking, then come on forward. People come on forward and fill in if we're going to stop walking then. We'll have to keep losing the war against AIDS. This is a picket of this federal office building where the Department of Health and Human Services offices are located. It coincides with a picket that's occurring today in Jackson, Mississippi, and in Washington, D.C. at the White House. The delegation of people in Washington are a delegation primarily of people with AIDS and ARCs. They come from Seattle, from San Diego, from Boston, from Atlanta, from Baltimore, from Washington, D.C., and one person who's not a person with AIDS, but who's been a heroine in the struggle is also there. The woman that walked across Death Valley challenging the president to say the words AIDS, Patty Rose, is also there in Washington again, picketing the president. We are here primarily to support that demonstration which is occurring in Washington, to try to spark across the land general citizen support for the actions that are being led so overwhelmingly by people with AIDS to try to get the nation to move into an effective response to this epidemic. There is a 9-point plan that has been put forward by the Mobilization Against AIDS, and we have speakers addressing key points of that plan, dealing with research, education, treatment, and civil rights. We also have a guest here from the civil rights movement of France, SOS Racism, Harlan Desire. Harlan will also be speaking of the solidarity in terms of the civil rights movement to block discrimination against people with AIDS and communities at risk and people in general. That is an international concern, not just a local concern. The speaking will last approximately a half an hour. There are about 5 speakers.
Thank you and good afternoon. We all know that AIDS has been a devastating disease in the gay community, here and across the country and in the world. We've been affected by this on every level, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, and economically. Because of the treatment of this disease by some of the people in the media, and of course by our people in the new right, we have seen our lifestyles held up to public ridicule and scrutiny. We've seen distortion and lies. We've been wrongly blamed for creating this disease, of infecting innocent victims, of being thoughtless, uncaring people. We've been told that this disease is our punishment for living our lifestyles. Let me tell you, AIDS is not caused by the gay community. The blame for the spread of this disease is on this country's government for not even requesting funds for research on this disease until 2 years after its identification. 2 critical years were lost in research time because of a bigoted, uncaring, insensitive government that only moved when politically threatened and continues to this day to resist doing what is necessary and what is right. Still, after 4 years, this government's response has been mostly to transfer funds from one project to another, threatening decreased funding in all the other minority communities for all of the really horrible diseases that are in this country as well. We need funds. We need funds for specific treatment on every level for people with acquired immune deficiency syndrome and AIDS-related complex. With this new crisis, the AIDS crisis, the new right and the moral majority have been attacking us on every level they can possibly think of. Their method has been to spread hatred and bigotry by spreading misinformation and through distorting facts. They have attempted to intimidate us by the threat of emotional violence. They thought that we would submit to repressive measures. they've been pushing this country to return to the days when sexism and racism and homophobia are acceptable. We say no. No to hatred and bigotry. We say yes to the freedom to be ourselves with justice and representation for all of us in our land. We say yes to a vision of progressive action. Those destructive groups, led by the Jerry Falwells and the Phyllis Schlaflys, and now we have Hotzi down in Houston who wants to shoot us, who wants to drive us into the ground. They spout their hypocritical words of hatred and demagoguery under their guise of Christianity. We will not accept it. We are here today and will continue to be here to uncover the fraudulence of their movement and their purpose. While professing love of life and family, these are the same people who support the repressive actions of President Reagan. They are the people who support that president in his dismantling of the human services system in this country, the buildup of weapons to fight an unknown war. In Star Wars, they're going to spend $3 billion for Star Wars and reduce other kinds of human services. But these are the people who, with their words of hate, attempt to separate us from each other, our human family. They want to destroy our vision, our dreams of equality and peace, and even justice. I must say again loudly and clearly to you, and to them, and to all who hear this, AIDS is not a gay disease. AIDS has not been a gay disease. AIDS is not going to be a gay disease. It is a disease that affects gay men, and it also affects non-gay women, men, and children. It is not a disease that is only in San Francisco or in New York or in Los Angeles or in Houston. It is also in every rural area and part in this world. People who have this disease, wherever they are, whoever they are, must have the finest treatment available and possible, without threat of limitations on their lives, such as the loss of jobs, or homes, or friends, or families. They must have the best and the most sensitive care. We demand a national plan for treatment and for education. It must be paid for and supported by the federal government. We petition for a national legislation to protect our rights, all people's civil rights, and end the dual messages that we have. On one hand, we get a statement that says, of course we're not going to quarantine. And in the next second, we get, but of course there is the possibility of isolation. We must be constantly vigilant and understand what those words mean. We want effective, non-punitive, supportive services for all who have been diagnosed with AIDS. We must be assured of confidentiality. You know, that's a major concern for us, because basically what happens is if we lose that, we have the possibility of losing everything, including our housing, including our insurance, including our jobs. But also, let me warn you that at this point, there is no such thing as confidentiality. Through all of the problems, I want all of us to realize that in the gay community and all affected communities, we, above all, must hold on to our hope, must hold on to our understanding that we will win our struggle against bigotry and oppression. As we always have, we will win our battles and we will also win our war. We now commit ourselves to continue the fight for our rights that we have so painfully gained. We will push past any obstruction to our living our fullest potential. We will not succumb to ugly propaganda. We will not allow ourselves or our movement to go back. We pledge only to go forward to ensure our advancement in our cause for human survival. Thank you.
As the most famous person with AIDS, perhaps, Rock Hudson showed, people with AIDS have tremendous courage and have very much led the struggle to try to get this nation to have an adequate response to AIDS. The delegation, as I mentioned in Washington, are primarily people with AIDS and people with ARCs. Perhaps one of the best known leaders, certainly one of the most effective leaders of people with AIDS in San Francisco is our next speaker, the president of the San Francisco People with AIDS Alliance, John Lorenzini.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to start off by acknowledging that there are an invisible group that are becoming more and more visible, that are people that need to be acknowledged as well, people who have AIDS-related condition, and I welcome you guys here and encourage your support and working with the issues. When we talk about medical care and treatment about people with AIDS, one of the glaring deficits that we have around patient care is what is happening to people with the AIDS-related condition. These people are not given the social benefits that people with AIDS are getting, and yet many of those people are more adversely affected by this disease than some people who have the disease itself. Important also along this line is to realize that we've now had this disease for a full decade. Even though it's only been seen in the medical labs and in the cases in 1980, it was fully a presence in this country for now a full 10 years. And at the end of that 10 years, the American government has only one thing to show for itself, and that is the HTLV antibody test, which is a tool of hate and discrimination. This has been the treatment and the care that has been provided for people with AIDS and AIDS-related conditions is a particular treatment that helps to screen and identify and allow for discrimination and hate. This is coming from the medical community that has the strongest lobbyists, the AMA, in the American government, and yet the only kind of medical care that we're getting is this tool that shows their care and their conscience. Truly, the real issue here is not just the medical government, but also the medical care and the AMA and the FDA and all of the government and AIDS-related services that are to be provided by the medical community. We have seen a tremendous failure, not only in the government, but also in the medical care itself. At this time, France, who has had less resources than we have, has definitely done a better showing in providing care. They were the leaders to find the virus. They were the leaders in providing antiviral drugs. They continue to be the leaders in medical care and treatment. This is certainly a very indicative issue of, and it's basically been used as a moral issue as opposed to being a caring response about a health crisis that has nothing to do with your sexuality, but has everything to do with the health epidemic that threatens this world. Thank you.
We have two messages of support, one from an elected official and one from a whole large group of people in another nation. To take the message of support from an elected official first, there aren't too many elected officials that have moved forward boldly on this issue. There aren't too many that stood up on the floor of the House or the floor of the Senate and said this isn't right and we have to increase funding. And one of the few that has is Senator Alan Cranston. Yeah. And he's... And it's not a surprise that therefore his office called us and said the senator would like to issue a statement of support for what you're doing. Can we read it? So therefore, introducing from the office of Senator Alan Cranston to read the senator's message, Joe Cooney. Joe?
Dear friends, I regret that I cannot be with you and others attending the rally today in support of greater funding for AIDS activities. I share with you a deep concern for those suffering from AIDS and join with you in efforts to ensure that every step is taken to conquer AIDS and to prevent the tragedy from spreading. In fiscal year 1985, the federal government spent $108 million on AIDS research and public health activities. As scientists continue to make great strides in understanding this disease, additional funds are needed to enable our country's researchers to pursue every lead. Thus, I strongly urge the Senate Appropriations Committee to increase substantially AIDS research and education activities funding for fiscal year 1986. Just last week, the Senate passed legislation that includes $232 million for AIDS, more than double the current budget. Although much progress has been made in our efforts to conquer AIDS, no cure or vaccine has yet been developed. Since the first cases of AIDS were reported 4 years ago, I have been fighting continuously each year for needed increases in federal funding for AIDS activities. I will continue my efforts this year and every year to ensure the resources necessary to bring an end to this terrible epidemic. With best wishes, sincerely, Alan Cranston.
As being gay and bisexual people in general, and against discrimination against people with AIDS in specific. I'm therefore very proud to introduce the founder and the head of SOS Racism from France, Harlan Desar. Harlan?
Thank you very much. My English is not good at all, and I will try to explain you what we are doing in France. Our movement, SOS Racism, works in France and in Europe to fight discrimination, all discrimination. The little outstretched hand that we sold to 2 million people says, touche pas à mon pote, in English, hands off my body. But who's my body? My body is the victim of racist attacks, of discriminatory acts. In my country and in Europe, many communities are concerned by racism. Arabs, black, women, gypsies, Jewish, gays of both sexes. This button has been brought for support and carried as a statement, help anti-racists throughout Europe, forming a front of tolerance that is strong enough now to stand up before another front of another kind, which calls itself national, the National Front. When we started our movement, there was an increasing popular sympathy towards Jean-Marie Le Pen, the leader of the National Front. This party denounced Arabs, Jewish to be responsible for unemployment and crisis. He pointed out the gay community as responsible for perverting the society. We are now able, along with many community groups in France and Europe, to work on an ambitious level. We organized a concert, Place de la Concorde, last 15th of June, where 400,000 people came to listen to multiracial, multicultural music, with African, European, Asian musicians performed all night long for the sake of anti-racism and tolerance. That way, we showed that most people in France are anti-racist, and we gave back to racists the label they deserve, which is the label of shame and margin. Today, I am here in San Francisco at the Mobilization Against AIDS before you, and you know that some politicians and some journalists would like us to get back to our closets. Do they know that homosexuals have always struggled for equality? Do they know what's happened is just another terrible burden on the long way of the gays' fight for the recognition of their existence and their right for equality? Do they know those politicians who belong to the moral majority that they are worse than AIDS? Many people of the moral majority are ready to create a statement of apartheid regarding to the gay community. Using AIDS as a political argument, they are using medical statistics and statements no doctor would use. In France, we don't want the authorities to do what is beginning to be done here with the HTLV3 test. We don't want that this test could be used as selection, items, jobs, insurance, and so on. That's why we ask with the gay community group Aid for AIDS for the Institut Pasteur. That's why we laid out a European Charter for Equality against Racism and Apartheid that includes discrimination against the gay community. That's why we participated to the March of the Gay People in France, in Paris last June, and that's why the gay groups are participating to our march on the 7th of December, a march against all kinds of discrimination, against apartheid and for equality. That's why we want to create link between the organization fighting against discrimination and against all kinds of racism here in America and the one we have created in Europe. And that's why our first project is to ask to some high school students here in America to go to France to explain what they live, and we hope that some high school French students will be able to go here next year. We have a lot to learn from each other's experiences. The international solidarity has to be built across the ocean. We are on a common struggle against the same enemy, discrimination. I am very happy to be here and to express the solidarity of the French with you.
So we're not alone. It's not just 100 people in San Francisco and a dozen people in Washington. It's global. Thank you, Harlan. Picking up on a similar themes of the people who would use AIDS to turn American against American, and who would use AIDS to violate the civil rights of Americans, and who would use AIDS to fire people from their jobs, drive them out of their homes, deny them housing. Picking up on that theme is a longtime civil rights activist, Dr. William Paul. Bill?
I'd like to talk today about some of the problems of misinformation and some of the really crucial issues raised by the lack of education, especially around AIDS prevention. It is known that there are ways to dramatically reduce the spread of AIDS. There are effective means by which people can be told about safe sex. And moreover, there are quite a few strategies available to us that could reduce the immense costs to the American people that AIDS is going to impinge on us. It is very, very important that we understand that part of the civil rights issue is also a scientific and an educational issue. What we're seeing with AIDS is the long-term historic consequences of enforced ignorance. The target groups, in this case, are gay men, lesbians, and bisexuals, but the target groups have also included black people, specifically Haitians. This is not new in the history of disease. Other people have suffered from disease and have been attacked because they suffered in greater numbers than others. It's not uncommon in the history of disease for certain groups to be vulnerable initially and then to find perhaps that a disease spreads elsewhere. Tragic history of the Hawaiian people is one example, nearly wiped out by disease. In this city, as we found from the work of a historian named Alan Berube, there was a plague scare around the turn of the century, which in fact led to physical violence against the Chinese community. In Honolulu at that time, the center of Chinatown was burned down. It is also a fact historically in our time that the Nazis have used disease and disease metaphor to attack other target groups. Jews were referred to as vermin. Films showed Jews as rats who spread disease and pollution and contagion. Now, the relevance of this to my research is that as an educational psychologist, I started a national task force for Division 9 of the American Psychological Association, 1977. This ultimately involved 31 researchers and produced a comprehensive book on sexual orientation as a social issue. My work in that task force consisted of the study of misinformation and propaganda dealing with sexual orientation. Following the work of the task force, this was endorsed and became an official publication of the American Psychological Association, Division 9, And it has been used in a number of ways, in legislation, judicial forums, so that we have a body of empirical evidence on what is a very, very dangerous and systematic organized hate campaign in this country. There are people right now spreading misinformation about AIDS using techniques, well-known and easily identified techniques of psychological warfare. That is, using the techniques of psychology to hurt other people. This is unethical. It violates not only medical practice, it violates the specific ethical code of the American Psychological Association. Now, on the one hand, we know that's going on. One of the most conspicuous perpetrators is a man named Paul Cameron. We know, on the other hand, that there apparently isn't enough money for AIDS education. There isn't enough money to do something that could prevent an immensely costly and tragic disease. And yet, a congressman, DuNah in this case, from Southern California, has hired with federal money a man named Paul Cameron, who is a leading figure in this hate campaign. And I want to show you something now that is being circulated in this country by a man who is funded by the federal government as an AIDS expert, as a consultant to a congressional committee. This is the material produced by Paul Cameron. We have a child, a little girl in this case, and a man's arm with an axe hanging over her head, that now gay people are violent killers of little children. We have also a man dragging a little boy into a bathroom. This, by the way, is a great example of what's called black propaganda. That is propaganda, or disinformation in modern terminology, propaganda from unknown sources, spreading lies that eventually become considered scientific fact. You'll notice that in both cases, the perpetrators, you don't see their faces, they're anonymous, which heightens the mystery. The sky's the limit. Now, this individual, Paul Cameron, is classified as an AIDS expert. He's given immense amounts of money to educate people about AIDS. And I would ask all of you, is that scientific? No! I think, in fact, it's unscientific. It's not education. I think it's an organized hate campaign. What I want to do now, in closing, is to ask all of you to respond to this, to spread the word about what is going on in this country around AIDS. Following me are two very, very fine colleagues. One is Dr. Steve Moran, who was the chair of the Board of Social and Ethical Responsibility for the American Psychological Association, a body that I belong to. I think you'll be proud to know that the American Psychological Association threw Paul Cameron out for unethical conduct. Dr. Moran has presented a very important body of research at the Association for the Advancement of Science on how bigotry does reduce AIDS education and AIDS research. Also with us today is my old friend and colleague, Dr. John Neumeier. Dr. John Neumeier is an epidemiologist, studies the spread of disease and contagion, and he is, in fact, one of the leading authorities in this country on the use of IV needles. Dr. Neumeier prepared the first and the best pamphlet on how to reduce the risk of AIDS with needles, and this pamphlet was attacked by the right wing in Southern California. And there were very successful attempts to limit or reduce its distribution. So we have an immense problem, but we've also got, on our side, a lot of expertise, and we've got the facts. Thanks a lot, folks.
Heard about the IV drug user as a at-risk group. We don't hear much about them. There are about 1 million Americans who choose to use heroin or cocaine or speed or occasionally other drugs by needle. Many of them are at risk for AIDS because they share needles. These drugs that I mentioned are at least as habit-forming as tobacco, though of course not as deadly as that drug until the recent advent of the AIDS virus. But now these 1 million Americans are very much at risk, and it's appropriate that we're having this rally on the edge of the Tenderloin, because the Tenderloin is one of the 3 major concentrations of IV drug users on the West Coast. But the Tenderloin gives a misimpression of the IV drug user.
by and large, this is it's a cross-section of the American population. All age groups, certainly all educational levels, all social class levels, the suburbs and the countryside as well as the city. These are people that are caught up in habits, which unfortunately, while these habits endure, put them very much at risk for this disease. At the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, our emphasis has always been to reduce the social distance between persons of this sort and the rest of us. We try to emphasize that, in a sense, most of us are junkies. We're sugar junkies, we're tobacco addicts, we're almost all of us addicted to one form or another of enjoyable consumption. It's just that this particular consumption is putting many Americans at great peril of their lives. We try to help the addicts themselves to reduce their social distance from the rest of us, to reintegrate them into society. So really the emphasis of what we need is a campaign of education among the IV users. The changes they have to make in their lives are so simple and so straightforward. It's just a question of reducing or eliminating the sharing of needles, because that's how the disease is spread. Or at the very least, if needles have to be shared because the illegality of them makes them scarce, at least take some very simple measures to clean the needles with some household equipment, household bleach, and 30 seconds of time, a needle can be cleaned between one person's using it and the next person's using it. Well, to get this message across, we have to be able to speak frankly to the users and to recognize that they're citizens like the rest of us that are caught up in a habit, much like the habit of smoking cigarettes, that is perhaps temporary, but there it is. They continue to do it. Let's help them avoid this deadly disease while they continue to use drugs. So my emphasis, the way I add to the other speakers, is simply for a little funds, a little money for the education of users, perhaps to help them to develop the kind of self-help groups that the gays across the country are so well endowed with. With IV users, we don't have self-help groups yet it's such a simple thing to employ, to pay a few IV users to go back to their haunts, their shooting partners, to spread the word, to get the simple message across about avoiding AIDS disease. That process of education, though, requires us to be conversant, to be of an attitude to recognize that the speed freak or the junkie is another person just like ourselves, caught up in a temporary problem. And that recognition of humanity, I think, can allow us to speak to the users as fellow citizens and to get the message across. Above all, it's something we have to do quickly because there's not much time. The virus is beginning its spread in this population, and if something is not done in a year or two, we can have the problem that New York City now has, where an estimated 60,000 IV drug users are now infected with the AIDS virus and may show up in the AIDS caseload in a very few years. That problem is not the problem in California. The problem is we have healthy IV users who are not infected with the virus but need the message quickly about the danger that faces them. So, in closing, I call for the country as a whole to adopt the strategy of the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic to regard the users of drugs as fellow citizens and to speak to them on their level, in their language, with the compassion that's needed to help them recognize the peril that faces them. Thank you.
As both an AIDS researcher and also one who's advocated at the federal and state level through 3 budget cycles now for increased federal and state expenditures for AIDS-related activities. As a researcher, I've talked with my colleagues who also have received federal money for research. Every single one will tell you that we have been...
Of hospital care alone, just 34 AIDS patients is more than the federal government has spent for prevention. Of the $3 million we spent in fiscal year 5, almost all of that for prevention, almost all of that was put into education for healthcare providers. Only $150,000 was spent with the national priorities of change. The federal government's research agenda has been characterized by homophobia and insensitivity to prevention issues. Only with the active involvement of people like yourself will those priorities change. Thank you.
All to say, that's what we've been doing for the last 4 years. What they've done in AIDS in the first year it was reported is spend nothing. In the second year it was reported, they spent nothing. In the third year it was reported. Therefore, we're in Jackson, Mississippi. Therefore, we marched in 40 cities across the United States last May. Therefore, we have support from France, and our efforts will continue. This concludes this rally that began yesterday at 7:30 and now 1 o'clock this afternoon. There are some volunteers, people that joined us last night. They said, "You want to make a short announcement?" So the mobilization against AIDS rally is over. One of the volunteers would like to make a brief announcement to you. So let me give you the mic for 90 seconds. John.
I'm going to be here all night.
We want to continue this vigil as long as possible. If it goes on for a week, if it goes on for 3 months, we'll do it in an organized way where we sign up for shifts, take education in front of the public, in front of the media all the time. We're here for 3 months from this day. The media won't be able to ignore us. We'll be like the hostages in Iran. We're now in the 3rd month. We're now in the 4th month. We're now in the 6th month. However long it takes us to stay here. Tomorrow at the St. Francis Hotel, we will be picketing Dr. James Mason. So we don't have much time to organize this. If anybody's free, tomorrow, 4 o'clock, we will be at the St. Francis Hotel picketing Dr. James Mason.
Dear Mom, we did it. Bye, Mom.
Okay. So therefore, we conclude our rally on October 28th. Second day of the AIDS Vigil in San Francisco. Thank you.
Ready to be here.
Also, 3 of the people who were just on video last night
Until they take me away, and as soon as they
themselves
release me,
from
I'll
the
be
door.
back. Go ahead.
We need to walk up to the safety of the welcome. We need to make sure that those people with the utmost respect become trustworthy. And we need to make sure that once we actually do it, that they can come back and join our permanent ongoing vision.
Yeah. How the hell can you dance when you're chained to a door? Anybody bring any whips? Italian? Anybody? We need an Italian translator. We need an Italian translator if there's one available. Make sure they know we're here. United, we'll never be defeated. The people, united, will 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 never be defeated. Yeah. And I ain't leaving. Sound like I feel we're gonna have another long night. All right. I'm the only one that does, and I ain't telling. I mean, we got to. It's all dang one hell of a ride. off the ground, baby. You cure yourself of AIDS by eating garlic and drinking your own urine. Remember that. When the bubonic plague was going through Europe. I heard that, but my taste buds don't like it. Everyone that caught it died except the ones that had garlic at the doors of the window, which meant they ate. Drink your own urine. The uric acid and ammonia in your urine will kill anything in your body that doesn't belong there. Money for AIDS! Money for AIDS! Stop the war! Money for AIDS! Stop the war! Money for AIDS! They don't want the cure for AIDS! Stop the war! Money 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 for AIDS! Stop the war! That's right. That'll give you a good fucking answer right there. They don't want the cures for diseases. There's too many people making money looking for the goddamn cures. Heal thyself, physician. Drink your own urine. You are what you eat. You cannot be yourself unless you eat yourself. There's a lot of goddamn urine. Trying to get your goddamn sympathy in there. Take over the microphone and get a different point of view. I haven't got my point of view. Open the microphone up next time, huh? Baloney bastards. Oh, girl, give me a break. I've been up all night. Land of the cemetery and they cut the goddamn mic off. Because I got a cure for AIDS, all right? Yeah. Hungry bastards. All the doctors are after your money, keeping you sick and stupid, making money on your fucking diseases. The only reason now is the site of I know what we can add in. All prohibitions on clean needles. Wake up. Repeal all prohibitions on clean needles. Nobody will get it from needles anymore. We shall not be moved today. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday. No wonder my mother doesn't like me. Hand in hand, we'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand today. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday. We will conquer fear. We shall conquer fear. We shall conquer fear today. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe
We did last night, and if we have to, we will again tonight with this time change.
Hey, y'all don't walk too far.
I don't.
Dave, you got all your stuff?
You know what I was doing, man?
Stephen Russell. I'm a person with AIDS-related complex.
How old are you?
I'm 26 years old. I've had AIDS-related complex for over 3 years now.
You got diagnosed 3 years ago?
3 years ago, I was diagnosed as what at that time they were calling pre-AIDS, and since then they've changed the name to AIDS-related complex. It's the exact same thing, only they're playing name games.
My name is Jerry Hunson, and I've got AIDS-related complex. I've had it since roughly last March. I'm about to be hospitalized. I was supposed to be in the hospital at this moment, but I'm going to stay here until we can try to work something out.
He may have to leave tomorrow to go into the hospital, but we're not leaving until they force us to leave, and they're going to have to take me to jail when I leave, and as soon as I'm released from jail, I'm going to be back.
My name's Frank Burt, 26. I'm diagnosed with AIDS-related complex 2 months ago, and I feel the same way as these guys do. I'm tired of ARCs being put on the second seat.
How do you feel?
Tired. I've been up since yesterday morning.
And
I've been here since
We've all
last
been
night,
up
since
since
beginning.
yesterday morning, and we've been out here in the plaza since between 7 and 7:30 last night. We held an all-night vigil, and now we're gonna be here for as long as possible. If they don't come and take us away today, we'll be here through the night. If they don't come and take us away tomorrow, we'll be here through the next night, and I'm just gonna stay here.
How does ARC make you feel?
You basically have the same symptoms as a person with AIDS. You've got fatigue, weight loss, swollen lymph glands, fevers, thrush, which is a yeast infection of the throat. You have basically the exact same symptoms as a person with AIDS. The only difference between AIDS and ARC is AIDS has a CDC, Center for Disease Control, surveillance definition for surveillance purposes only of a person with pneumocystis or Kaposi's sarcoma or one or two other of the life-threatening illnesses. I myself have 3 or 4 life-threatening illnesses. However, because they do not fit surveillance purposes definitions of the CDC, I'm declared a person with ARC and I'm not eligible for benefits from Social Security.
Are you all members of Mobilization Against AIDS?
No, we are all here on individual. We have chose to do this on our very own. We are not with any organization. We need to make that very clear.
What? Is there a reason that you haven't joined any of the organizations?
Actually, the truth of the matter is I do belong to a few of them, but I'm not here representing them. I'm here representing myself.
Mm-hmm.
and I'm also here representing all persons with AIDS and AIDS-related complex, particularly AIDS-related complex because that's where my condition is, and as far as I'm concerned, that's where the most immediate action needs to take place. People die of AIDS-related complex at the same rate as people die from AIDS, but people with AIDS-related complex receive no benefits practically.
We can't even get Medi-Cal. That's
Can't
how
even get
serious it
Medi-Cal.
is. We cannot even get any kind of medical coverage. We are not eligible for Medi-Cal.
Because we're not diagnosed with AIDS, but we
But
can
AIDS
die.
people are.
But we can die. I had a very dear friend who had AIDS-related complex for over 2 years, and through that entire time, he fought and fought and fought with Social Security services, trying to get SSI benefits and Social Security benefits, and he died on a Thursday, and the very next day, he received his first check in the mail from Social Security after fighting for 2 years, but the man was already dead. And I don't want this to happen anymore. I don't want it to happen to me, him, or anybody else out there because I'm just so tired of my friends dying in my arms, literally on occasion. I just can't handle it anymore, and I don't know what else to do.
continue to hysterically
Hi.
scare